Hey everybody, hope you're doing well. I'm doing a video today at the beach. It's a little cloudy out, but it's still pretty, so hopefully we'll get some sun peeking through for some scenery. So this video is the first video in my Ops MBTI compatibility series where I'm going to start getting into the nitty-gritty of the parts. I tried to give some good context about compatibility, about the most important part of this conversation, which is how our functions are attached to our nervous system. And I think we have a good context to get started. One last thing before I get into today's content. So I used to make YouTube videos scripted. And as an info dominant, I prefer this because I want to make sure that I'm covering all my bases. And I want the info to be complete. But I got feedback over time that it's more connective and personable when I just talk. So lately, that's what I've been doing. And that's what I want to do with this series. But I'd be curious on your feedback on this style. If you like it, if you would prefer something that's a little more informationally robust, or if this conversational style is okay. So comment below, let me know what you think. I'm always open to feedback. I want this to be enjoyable for you. So, all right, that's my play rant for today. That's my 1 minute of play. So let's get into it today. If you were to ask me what the most impactful part of personality is on romantic relationships, and even human relationships, I think, I would have to say the modalities, the sexual modalities. And that's why I'm doing this video first. I think this is a massive piece of who you're going to be compatible with, who you're going to have smooth connection with, and who you're going to be able to resolve conflict with. So I think this is a good place to start. So for those of you who are not familiar with objective personality, let me start with something you are familiar with that will give you context for the sexual modalities. So everything in personality is polarity, right? When you get beneath the 4 letters of Myers-Briggs, you still find the Jungian functions, the cognitive functions. There's 8 of them. And you have basically these 8 functions are just 4 letters with an introverted or extroverted charge. And you get a polar effect. So if you're extroverted feeling, you're going to have introverted thinking on the opposite pole. Because cognitively, that's what the brain is having to do to balance itself, right? If you are broad on the spectrum of values and emotions, you're going to have a counter polarity of introverted thinking, which is deep on logic, reason, and what works. It makes sense. It's generally intuitive. Everything related to cognition and personality and everything in life exists on a plane of polarity. So whether or not you're familiar with objective personality, you're familiar with that concept. So the sexual modalities just expand and add a little bit of nuance to that idea. So basically what you have is you have your 4 cognitive functions, and 2 of them are going to be charged with a masculine modality, and 2 of them are going to be charged with a feminine modality. And again, they're going to be opposite, just like the functions. So if you're going to punch on feelings, you're going to be feminine with logic. And if you, by default, punch on the sensory, you're going to be feminine with intuition, right? Because cognitively, we only have so much energy to expend. You can't expend a ton of energy punching on feelings and then also be able to add the same energy and punch to thinking. So it makes sense that all our minds are just poles in lots of different ways. And the more we can understand those poles, the more self-aware we can be. But the more we can understand those poles, the more we can make sense of relationships and how those tensions and polarities express themselves in our connections. And it's fascinating what we can uncover when we go down that rabbit trail. So that's what this video is all about. If you're not familiar with the sexual modalities, it is a piece of personality that Dave and Shan Powers uncovered with objective personality when they were learning to type people in separate rooms. And they realized that each of these functions had feminine and masculine charges. And it's actually pretty easy to see if you're looking for it. But we're going to talk about how it pertains to relationships. Okay, so just to give a baseline here, we all have two deciders, thinking and feeling, and we have two observer functions, sensory and intuition. One of them is masculine and one of them is feminine. So if you're by the way, I'm not going to get into all the nuances of the modalities. I am setting this stage to talk about it in the context of relationships. So this is not a deep dive into modalities. I'm just trying to give the basics here. So let's just use my personality as a reference point. I am a MFISTP or MFTISE. And what that means is the first letter, M, is masculine sensory. So my extroverted sensing is masculine. That means I push on the facts. I'll fight you on the facts. I will fight you in the physical world. I'm pushy, I'm shovey, I move the chess pieces around reality, and that's how I operate. Someone who is feminine sensory is going to be more flowy on those same topics, but they're going to push on the intuition and the patterns and the abstract world. They're not going to bend on the patterns. Then I am feminine with the tribe. That's the second letter. So I said I'm MF. So F is feminine with other people. So that means that I'm not going to be pushy on other people by default. I'm going to push on self first. So masculine TI, masculine SE. All right, so everybody is masculine on two of their functions. All right, so hopefully that helps you see the basics. So how does this all apply to compatibility? Well, it has a huge impact on your interactions with people, especially in close living quarters and intimate relationships. Okay, so I'm going to talk about this in two pieces. We've got the decider modalities and we've got the observer modalities. So let's talk about the decider piece first, because I think the decider modalities are actually the most important ones in a relationship. So from what I have found, and just for some context and a reference point here, I have been in relationship with two masculine FIs, two masculine TEs, and one masculine TI. And from my own personal experience, the masculine TI and the masculine FI, they can certainly have a charged relationship on the front end and be very attracted to one another. But as time goes on and you dig deeper, those two clash big time. And here's my theory. Here's my theory at this point, my working theory. The most compatible match between modalities is sharing the same letter that you're masculine with. So what I mean by this is, if you're masculine feeling, you're going to have an easier time understanding another partner that also has masculine feeling. Why? Well, one other thing I need to share before I go any further into this is that your sexual modalities are what you fight with. They are what you're going to either fight on or bend on. So that says a lot about what is going to come up in your relationship. So if you have one partner who's immovable on 30 stories deep of logic, and you have another partner who's immovable on 30 stories deep of values and emotions, I'm talking about TI and FI here, what do you think is going to happen long term? The TI, especially if it's masculine, is going to fight for what makes sense, while the FI, while it's masculine, is going to be fighting for their personal values. And those are very, very different things. And I can tell you right now, it doesn't feel good to either party. Because what ends up happening essentially is masculine feelers punch with their feelings. And if you got feminine feelings, think of it like a little kid. That little kid is getting punched by the masculine feelings. It can't really defend itself. Right? Feminine feelings cannot defend themselves against masculine feelings. And feminine logic can't defend itself against masculine logic. Feminine TE has no chance against masculine TI. Masculine TI is going to bulldoze feminine TE. Same with feminine FE. Masculine FI is going to bulldoze feminine FE. And so if you're constantly bulldozing one another, especially if you're unhealthy individuals, it is going to be super intense. It's going to be very hard to repair. Because let me give you an example. Let's say that a masculine TI has a partner who has feminine TE, the top. Let's play this out with the functions. Okay? The masculine TI partner has feminine FE. So, what is going to be the trigger for the masculine TI partner? Lack of harmony, bad vibes. That's the biggest fear for the TI. So, when things go bad, the masculine TI is going to want to be talking out feelings to appease the vibe so it can feel better and return to its baseline and do the TI again. Well, when the partner is masculine, FI at the bottom, the problem to solve is to expend that masculine energy. Well, what do you think that looks like between partners when one is feminine feelings and the other one's masculine feelings, especially in a demon state? It's not good. It's not good. And it's very hard to recover. It's not because either person is bad or either person has bad intentions. It's because neither is taking responsibility for the feeling state. And then when it finally comes up under pressure, there's no way to resolve it because the feminine FE wants to talk out the feeling state and reserve it collectively. And the masculine FI just wants to blast their irrational, personal, subjective values out. And the two have no understanding of one another. The nervous systems just get completely fucked, right? So that's one example. We could give a lot more. But this polarity between masculine and feminine functions has a huge impact on how your relationships play out, especially the decider function. So let me give some bad, okay, and best as far as what I think the best connections are here. Maybe the hardest connection you're going to have is if you're a masculine TI and you have a masculine FI partner. Those two do not understand one another. What's the way to say it? They can cognitively understand one another, but they're not going to resonate. They're not going to resonate with one another. And that's the real problem. So that would be the hardest connection to have. Now, I've also been in relationship with two feminine FIs. Much better. Much better. There's obviously differences in the decider function, which we'll talk about in another video. But from the standpoint of the modalities, it's much softer. You still have thinking fighting with thinking. The feelings are not fighting. You're not, from the standpoint of the logical TI, you're not getting a lot of irrational punches. Because they hurt. They really hurt. Both parties. If you've got a partner who has feminine feelings, and you have feminine feelings, like I said, you're better off. If you have a different decider function, there's going to be different challenges, but you're at least not going to be punching one another where you don't have any weapons, right? It's like showing up to a fight and then having an unfair fight. One person has a knife, the other has a gun. Well, masculine TI is going to be the gun to feminine TE. Masculine FI is going to be the gun to feminine FE. So if you're in this sort of relationship, I feel for you. It's very hard to resolve. And what I've seen in my own experience and the experience of other people who I've seen in this type of connection is they end up having to distance themselves and have the type of relationship where there's a lot of separation. So if you're okay with that, maybe that's what you're looking for. Not everybody wants the same type of romantic connection. Some couples are more dependent on one another and closer, spend a lot of time together. Some are more distant. If you have a more distant connection, maybe it could work. I'm not saying any of these couldn't work. I'm just telling you, in close quarters, this one's going to pose a lot of challenges to your nervous system. And that's important to consider. Again, if it's feminine feelings, it's much more workable. And I think there's enough people in the ops group with this dynamic that can speak for this. And my experience certainly validates that. And for what it's worth, the endings of my relationships with the feminine FIs that I've been with were much easier. Much easier. If it says anything, at the end of my second relationship with the masculine FI person that I was with, she reached out to my ex-wife and they became great friends. They probably had a very similar experience of my narcissistic masculine TI. Sure, that's how they experienced it. Just cold, disconnected, punching their attempts to play feminine TE play with me. Doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel good at all. So, and the endings of my relationships with the feminine FIs were much smoother, much more pleasant, much less scary for my nervous system. So, for what it's worth, I think that kind of makes the point on how important this stuff is. It's not proof, just a data point. So, one more thing. I think the best, most compatible connection between decider modalities is sharing the same exact function with the same modality. So if you have masculine TI, you're gonna have the most peace in a connection with someone else who also has masculine TI. You're fighting with the same weapon. It's gonna feel more fair. It's not gonna be overwhelming in conflict. You're gonna be able to navigate it a lot better. To describe it in a childlike sense, the way I've experienced it is that masculine FI feels scary to me. It evokes fear in my nervous system. Masculine TI does not. It feels soft. It feels manageable. It feels like I can respond to it. And I'm not afraid. All right, so last part of this, one more point to make. The observer coin. I don't think this one is as important in relationship. I think it's about personal preference, whether they're masculine sensory or masculine intuition. What I've realized in my connections, because I have some experience, my mother is masculine SI, the person I was with who was masculine sensory was masculine SI. With my experience, the masculine sensory seems to share more common interests, more common likes in music, kind of moving around the physical world in a similar sense. And there are benefits to that in a relationship. There are ways to connect on those things, right? You got to give and take on each part of cognition. So you might prefer that. For me personally, I'm more energetically drawn to feminine sensory. I like that feminine energy. I like the softness. And there is a sacrifice for some of the hobbies and preferences of someone with a masculine sensory modality. But to me, there's nothing really lost. So it's more important about what you value and what's important to you. You might prefer to be with someone who's masculine sensory for the shared likes, but you will have a little bit more trouble with the magnetism and the connection, because masculine sensory and masculine sensory might collide on certain points. But again, you're going to share more interest. So I think this one can go either way. I don't think there's as much of a consequence on this one either way. I think the decider modality is the one that'll get you the most in trouble in a relationship. So what you fight with is really important. And I think we've got to really consider how our sexual charges on these functions impact our connections. So that's my overview of the modalities on objective personality. Let me know what you think in the comments. Let me know what questions you have, and I'll see you guys next time.